Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Keep breathing, take it in and let it out. Keep breathing, it's gonna be okay. Believe a power greater than what you are going through. When you don't know what to do, keep breathing.
That's right. When you don't know what to do, just keep on breathing. From the City of Angels, Los Angeles, and from Big Apple in New York City. Welcome to all my caregivers out there in Radio Land. I'm Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver. And we're coming to you live along with my beautiful co-host, Adrian Gruberg of the caregiverspace.org. And we're coming to you live and on demand 24/7 on numerous syndicated radio podcast networks and 26 global audio and video platforms, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Vimeo, Stitcher Radio, Blog Talk Radio, CastBox, Mixcloud, and about 20 more. And we are proud to be voted number 2 caregiver podcast of the top 50 on Player FM, and number 1 caregiver podcast of the top 50 on Player FM, and number 2 on caregiver podcasts on FeedSpot out of the top 60, and number 2 caregiver podcast on caringvillage.com. Got to get that right. And we have an especially exciting show planned for you today. Dr. Randall Bell, author of Post-Traumatic Thriving, The Art, Science, and Stories of Resilience, is with us today. So just a reminder, you can watch or listen to that interview and all our interviews, including the one we're doing now, on caregiverdave.com and all the other platforms I mentioned above. And make sure you can go to our caregiverdave.com website. Let me say that again. Make sure you go to caregiverdave.com. It's our free membership website. It's full of tons of resources and free gifts. Just sign up with your email, and we promise not to spam you. We just want to help you get connected with other caregivers who've been through what you are going through. So, welcome to the show, Doctor. We're so excited to have you on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And we always like to ask our first-time guest, just who is Dr. Randall Bell, and why was he placed on this earth?
Well, that's the big question, yeah. I was born in a little obscure town called Fullerton, California, but if you're into music, Leo Fender lived about 2 streets away, and that's our town's claim to fame. And grew up in Southern California. Long story short, I became an economist, and that led me to a number of disasters, and that led me to this book. And my purpose on earth is to keep being a great dad to my 4 wonderful children and to spread the word on healing from trauma.
Wow. And did you have any personal trauma in your life to be healed from, or you just read it all in a book?
You know, Dave, that's such an interesting question, because I started in on this book, Post-Traumatic Thriving, about 10 years ago, and I didn't realize I had a trauma that I hadn't healed from when I started writing it. And I was born with a congenital heart defect. I had open heart surgery when I was 11, and I made the classic mistake of burying the memory, forgetting about it, never speaking about it, which is exactly the wrong thing to do. So it turns out I was writing the book for myself.
Well, that's sometimes the best way to write a book. So now you talk about 3 choices when we face trauma. Let's get right into it. Why don't you go through that?
Yeah, well, when a trauma hits, ultimately we have 3 choices. One is to dive and be stuck in that trauma and be stuck as a victim and be stuck as, in the depression of that trauma. That's the first. I don't say that to be judgmental. That's just a choice we can make. Choice number 2 is to go from dive to survive. That's where we get back on our feet and we kind of reclaim the life we had. And that's admirable. But the focus of my study and my research has been those who not just got out of dive and survived, but thrived. And it's as if the trauma woke them up and in this awakened state, they did something phenomenal.
Wow. Well, I choose the latter.
Yeah.
You also talk about 5 stages of the grief factor, because I talk a lot about the grief process. You know, anytime we suffer loss, we go through grief. Your girlfriend could dump you. You go through grief. Doctor says you have cancer. The lawyer says bankruptcy is the only way out. So tell me your way of looking at grief and the 5 stages that go into it.
Well, the first chapter is on shock, which is it kind of precedes the grief process, the 5 stages of grief you referred to. But then the next chapters in terms of denial and bargaining and anger and depression and so forth, those mirror the 5 stages of grief. So, but the last 5 chapters at the end of the book, go through the literature on post-traumatic growth, which is a scientific, set of academia. What I do is I stick with the standard accepted science, but I bridge it and create a bridge from the 5 stages of grief to the 5 stages of growth or thriving, and that way we have a complete picture of what this, roadmap really looks like.
Just out of curiosity, our audience is burned out caregivers. What has your experience been in caregiving? Were you a caregiver? Do you know caregivers? I mean, what's the extent of your experience?
Yeah, I can't claim that I have, although that issue is close to me and my family. My mom is 99 years old. She's in the same home that I grew up with in Fullerton, California, and my sister is a caregiver. I try and visit at least once a week, but as far as what my sister goes through, my mom is elderly, and she's very forgetful, but she thankfully is very happy. She laughs at my jokes. She usually remembers my name. So she's in a good place. She has a quality of life, but still it's a lot of stress for my sister, even with those advantages. So I'm a little familiar with that issue.
Yeah. So what made you write this book, and what are your goals that you have for it? What do you hope to accomplish with this book?
Yeah, well, my career, Dave, is unique because I've been studying disasters for decades, since 1986. So I've worked on hundreds of these cases, things like the World Trade Center and the Flight 93 crash site and Hurricane Katrina. And I worked on the O.J. Simpson case and John Benet Ramsey, and
really?
You name a disaster. Chances are pretty good I was retained in those cases as an economist. And I started finding that talking to the people behind the statistics were more interesting than calculating the numbers. And I still calculate the numbers, and I enjoy that, but I enjoy getting to know these people. And I noticed that some people, when they're hit with a disaster, they go through these 3 stages: dive, survive, or thrive. And I really kind of, was passionately interested in why was this, and what were the thrivers doing that the divers and survivors weren't. So for 10 years I've been collecting their stories. A lot of these people, all the people in the book are my friends. I interweave their stories, but also studying the academic science behind thriving and interweaving a roadmap that was both scientifically sound but also captured the human element by bringing the principles to life through actual people that, where we were given permission to follow their story. And my goal with the book is to help people heal from trauma, because that's the number one thing. It's not drugs or alcohol or workaholism. The underlying problem, number one in the world, I'm convinced, is unresolved trauma. So if we can really directly address that, we'll make the world a better place, and that's my goal.
What kind of a doctor are you?
Well, my mom says I'm not the kind that helps people. But
Thanks, Mom.
I'm a sociologist, basically.
A sociologist, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I see the connection, right? How does a sociologist, get to writing a book about grief? You've seen a lot of grief in your clients, I assume, right? You have a practice?
Oh, every day.
Yeah. What percentage of your clients are going through some sort of grief or shock or trauma?
Well, virtually all of them. That's a normal process, isn't it? I mean, I'm working on several cases, probably 15 cases around the world. But for example, one of them is Hurricane Harvey, and the news cycle covered Hurricane Harvey months and months ago, maybe even years ago. But I can tell you, there's still people that have drywall rotting in their houses,
Sure.
have not gotten the insurance money to fix their kitchen cabinets. They're still living through the shock of that flood. And so a lot of the media pops in and out on these things, and then you change the channel and you think the problem's solved. But a lot of people are left with this grief process for years. And so I'm involved with them long term. There may be a lot of Dr. Randall Bells, but there's only one master of disaster, Dave, and that's me. So usually people have a pretty easy time finding me.
And you have a very good sense of humor as well. And I think every doctor should have a good bedside manner and a sense of humor. So you are still in practice now? You still see patients?
Well, I don't do trauma coaching. I think that's a misconception. I wrote the book, and I love the discussion, but anybody that would come to me, I would refer them to a certified trauma coach or preferably a licensed therapist. It's a serious business, and it's also kind of what's the right word? It's kind of a ticklish thing because the wrong trigger can send somebody down the wrong path. So while I've studied this very, very carefully, I'm the first to say, I've been certified to go through the trauma recovery process in prison and in jails and homeless shelters and that kind of thing. But for one-on-one counseling, I'm not the right person. I always refer someone to someone that is.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Caregivers, our audience, burned out caregivers, may or may not have had trauma. Certainly the ones they're caring for may or may not have had trauma. You've come up with some tips that you offer people who are dealing with trauma. Do you also have tips for people who are dealing with stress, or is it the same thing?
Well, they're similar and they're also distinctly different. But the protocol for relieving stress, whether as a caregiver or somebody in trauma recovery, are essentially the same because, as I presume you know, the human brain, we actually have three brains. The outer brain is the human brain, which we presumably are using right now. The midbrain is emotional. That's the mammal brain. The inner brain is the reptilian brain. That's where our instincts come from. So whether it be stress or trauma, what happens when we're stressed or traumatized, the outer human brain turns off and the inner instinct brain turns on. And that's where our brain chemistry can be altered through the process of stress or grief. The first thing I say in the book is if you're in a traumatic situation, get to a safe place, then read the book. But as far as the tips and the protocols to get better, there's two I introduced right in the shock chapter number 1, to help get people on that track to healing. Number 1, we call grounding. That's deep breathing exercises. It may sound simple, and because it's simple, a lot of people, dismiss it. But there's over 20 studies out of Harvard Medical School that say that deep breathing exercises rewires the brain. Literally, they've done brain scans from the reptilian brain where the trauma is kind of trapped into the mid and outer brain where we can heal. So deep breathing exercises. So if you're a caregiver, try just, stepping away and taking 6 or 10 deep breaths with your eyes closed. That literally will help rewire the brain and switch from our sympathetic to parasympathetic nervous system, which is basically saying switching from stress to calm. And the second one, Dave, is tell your story. We call that sitting in the fire in the prison because, trauma and stress are ugly things, and we see ugly things in the caregiving profession. We got to tell our story, whether that's to a therapist, a coach, a close friend, journaling. You can't internalize the stress and expect to heal or process it. Trauma or stress is not a solo activity. You got to find someone to share it with.
Great advice. Hey, listen, we're coming up on a break, so we're going to take a short break. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
We are a community of caregivers that understands and supports you wherever you are in your journey. We are a place to connect with other caregivers, but more importantly, a place to get practical, actionable help. There are lots of ways for you to get support. First of all, you can download our welcome pack. This will get you started on your Thrive journey. Next, you can ask and get answers to your questions by posting them here in our private Facebook groups. You can also get live online support by attending one of our live weekly Connect webinars. You can get practical, actionable advice by listening to our weekly podcast. You can hear and read other stories about other caregivers' experiences. Plus, add your own in our weekly Share Your Story forum, posted every Tuesday in the Facebook group. You can access essential resources and download practical Thrive Solutions packs, all of which are geared to help you thrive as a caregiver. You get lifetime access to all of our resources. Again, we're here to support you and help you thrive and to enjoy your life as a caregiver. And remember, this is a place to get hope, not just cope.
And we're back with our guest, Dr. Randall Bell, and my lovely co-host, Adrian Gruberg. We're talking about trauma and stress and grief and all those things. And Dr. Bell is an author. Is this your first book or your only book or many books?
I've read lots of books, but no, I've written about 4 or 5, I guess.
4 or 5. And what are the titles? Let's see if there's some correlation between them.
Dave, it's a weird mix. I wrote a textbook that's 500 pages for economists. It's titled Real Estate Damages. I don't recommend it. It will put you to sleep. But for geeks like me that get into this, it's exciting. I wrote a book called Leo Fender. I co-wrote it with Mrs. Leo Fender about the invention of the electric guitar. That was a very fun book to write, and still is a fun book to talk about. I wrote a book called Me, We, Do, Be, and I was on the Today Show with it. It did pretty well. It's basically the 4 cornerstones of success. Me is our mindset, we is our relationships, do is what we're doing, and be is what we're becoming. And it's a little formula for kind of having a strategic plan for our lives. And then, of course, post-traumatic thriving, what we're talking about. And I think there's a couple others in there, but those are the main ones that get talked about more often.
Yeah, and I'm reading your bio right here, and I mean, you are all over the place. How do you decide? Apparently, you're very talented in everything you do, but how do you decide where your passion is, unless it's in all these places? And is your passion today necessarily going to be your passion tomorrow?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Dave. Yeah, I do what I'm passionate about, and I have an eclectic mix of interests. I'm very interested in Leo Fender. I have a very large guitar and Leo Fender collection that I hope to get into museums soon. To be even more revealing about my weird eclectic passions, I have a very large Houdini collection that likewise I'm going to get into museums.
Oh,
I like writing. I love traveling. I love exploring. And whatever kind of comes to me, if I get passionate, watch out, because I'm going to write a book about it, or I'm going to collect everything on the planet about it, because I guess I just have a lot of energy.
You must have been a very confused teenager when somebody comes up and says, well, Randall, what are you going to be when you grow up? What did you tell them?
Yeah, I wanted to be. It changed all over the place. I wanted to be a medical doctor, but then one day I realized I didn't know the difference between an atom and a molecule, so that went out the window. I do very poorly in biology, but I do very well in math, and it turns out that I do pretty well with just kind of research-based things, like this book. I didn't know a lot about trauma, but I hit the books for 10 solid years. I have, the PhD level of research capability, so I dug in and I learned about it. And as a result, I healed from my childhood trauma of a congenital heart defect. And with that, I feel like I can maybe help people do the same thing. And with caregivers, it's not just the stress that they're going through. If they can utilize these principles to help the people they're caring for to process their trauma, we're going to have we're going to be better off all the way around.
So you're using your experience in trauma to inform your audience, whoever is reading your book, who does read your book, by the way. When you write a book, as you know, they say, well, who's your audience? And the narrower you get, right, that's what they want. Well, it's for everybody. No. Who's your book for?
Yeah, well, the book is doing pretty great because a lot of medical doctors are reading it. It's been profiled in medical journals. Wow. But I hate to answer that question the wrong way, but the truth is, by college age, 66 to 85% of the world population has had a trauma, and they didn't ever go to school to figure out how to process it. There was never an owner's manual for trauma, and that's what this is. It's an owner's manual for trauma. If you've had a trauma, and chances are you have, and I know I have, going through these processes, knowing that there's such great science on healing, there's no reason to, just kind of suffer through life with our unresolved trauma. There are solutions. So for anybody that wants to, kind of deal with this stuff in a healthy way, it is a broad audience, and I'm sorry I'm breaking the rules. It applies everywhere.
Well, rules are meant to be broken, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, people tell me, well, who's your book for? Caregivers? And I says, well, not really, because everybody is eventually going to become a caregiver or need a caregiver. There's no escaping it. So yeah, my book's for everybody, so I'm breaking the rules too. But I was always told, and the hospitals called trauma centers, that's where something bad happens, you're in an accident or whatever. Trauma is like something that two objects hitting each other. But you talk about being born with a congenital heart issue. Is that really a trauma in the classical definition of trauma?
Well, not necessarily, because some people may be born with the condition I had and think nothing of it, and it didn't traumatize them. And that's not to say it's not traumatizing, because what's important is it was traumatizing to me.
Yeah.
Long story short, my cardiologist as an adult, I was standing on the treadmill. She hadn't even plugged it in yet. When she did, I was just standing there doing nothing, and my heart rate was 150. Well, that's post-traumatic stress disorder in action. And she immediately knew what it was. I knew what it was. I knew the science. But I didn't realize I was suffering from that because I was doing the classic thing of burying those emotions. My cardiologist today is a woman, very capable, and my cardiologist as a child was a woman. And so in my mind, that's what triggered me to have this negative response. So for me, yeah, it was a trauma. But that's not to say that someone's trauma is valid or invalid. It's valid if it affects you, and we're really not in a competition. Whoever has a trauma and they're having a hard time, that's trauma.
Yeah, well, thank you for explaining that definition and broadening it, because, yeah, I didn't realize that trauma isn't the act, or it isn't a verb. It's the fact that whatever it is, it could be traumatizing you. And so
right.
that widened the definition a great deal. So let's talk about COVID-19. How has that thrown a monkey wrench in all of this?
Well, the statistics I shared earlier, 66 to 85% of the population have trauma. With COVID, it may be closer to 100%. I personally got COVID, a very bad case of it. I was down and out for about 3 months. So it traumatized me. Coming out of it, I don't know that I'm traumatized about it, but for someone else, like I just explained, it could be, something they really have to work through. But yeah, the whole world's been somewhat traumatized by this whole thing.
So, Doctor, how's the book going? You said you've got a lot of sales from the medical profession and other people as well.
Well, yeah, first of all, I didn't write this book from a monetary point of view. The book we put on Kindle for 99 cents. The idea is to get the information out. Yeah. But the response has been great. COVID really threw a wrench in it with our editing and our editing process. We're about to finally come out with our fully cleaned up and edited hardback. That'll be coming out in a month or two, and then we'll do an audio version of the book. Normally we have all that packaged right up front, but with COVID being the weird thing it was, we're just doing the best we can. But yeah, the media interviews and the response, particularly from the medical and psychology professions who really know what they're talking about and are really into this, that response has been great. Frankly, as a non-psychologist, as a non-medical doctor, you hope that you meet that threshold, and
Sure.
apparently it has, because the responses have been terrific.
So you've got a website. What type of things do you put on your website, since you've got so many potential things to put on it?
Well, we put a lot of the TV and radio, the podcast, like this. If we're
media.
allowed, we'll put this on the website, and that way people can kind of follow the discussions that we're having. We have plans to add things to the website, and maybe I'll do a podcast myself. I don't know that I'm smart enough to do it, but we'll see.
You know what? If I can do it, anybody can do it.
I don't know, but we'll see. We'll give it a shot. But
call me up. I'll help you out.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to put lots of free resources, because this is stuff that affects us, and we got to do a better job of dealing with it than what we have historically been doing.
And what is your website's name?
drbell.com, and you can either spell out doctor or DR, abbreviate it. Doesn't matter. We got it all covered. Just put in drbell.com and you'll find me.
And why do they call you the master of disaster?
Well, the story on the master of disasters thing, I did some case. I forget what it was. It might have been OJ, or it might have been Heaven's Gate. I don't know. But I think it was Heaven's Gate, the cult, down in San Diego. And the LA Times did an article on my career, and they started off with this line of calling me the master of disaster. And at first I didn't like it. I was kind of like, I've worked too hard to have that, cartoon title. And then I thought, you know what, I'm too uptight about it. I'm going to go with it. And now when I speak to high school kids or college kids, we hand out master of disaster T-shirts and hats and baseball caps. And, we have fun, because it brings... it makes this topic more accessible, with it. So I go with it.
So I'm just curious, what exactly did you do in the OJ case?
Oh, I worked with Lou Brown, Nicole's father, and in that capacity, I met the whole family. In fact, we're still friends to this day. And the thing about a disaster is that there's two sides. There's the emotional side, and everybody saw that on TV. But with any disaster, there's also practical issues. What do we do with the property? What do we do with managing the looky-loos, managing the media, all that kind of stuff? So I was working with Lou Brown primarily on how to handle the condominium where the murder occurred. And, we came up with a strategy to rent it out. And then eventually we were able to get it sold. But that was let's just say it was a complicated issue, but we sorted through it and navigated that practical issue together.
I'm assuming people didn't want to rent it, no? Because of what happened there?
Actually, renting it is relatively easy. It's trying to get a buyer and get it sold is more difficult. So we got it rented. It was actually the broker who had the listing. She rented it. And that kept the cash flow going so they could pay the bills until they eventually got it sold.
Oh. How are they doing today, family?
Well, Mr. Brown passed away.
It's not something that you easily get over, is it?
Yeah, no, it's not. And that's not the point of trauma. We don't get over it. We get through it. And the Brown family, Mr. and Mrs. Brown, have sadly passed away. Terrific, really wonderful people. Who handled that trauma with nothing in my mind but class and dignity. Denise is doing well. Tanya's doing well. Dominique is doing well. The three daughters. And, it's not, like I say, it's not something you'll ever forget, but they have handled it with a lot of class, a lot of dignity.
And do they still see their father? The children of
Nicole. I don't know. I don't really ask, if the kids, OJ's kids see him. I think they do, but I honestly don't know.
So tell us again, what's the difference between thriving, surviving, and diving?
Dive, survive, or thrive. Well, the idea to go from dive to survive to thrive is to allow that memory of that traumatic experience. It's not to forget it. Forgetting it. The idea is to have that memory go through our minds without being re-triggered, without that flash emotion of adrenaline pumping through our brains, and you get that fight, flight, or freeze, seized up adrenaline feeling. The idea is to allow the memory go through our minds without that triggering response. So, using myself as a bad example, I buried my trauma. Anytime anything was said about heart surgery or my situation, I got really tense. I got that emotionally charged feeling. Now I talk about it and it's a non-issue. It's a memory, but I don't get re-traumatized by it, and that's the goal.
Do you need to dive in before you get to survive and thrive?
Yeah, Adrienne, I'm so glad you asked that, because a lot of people want, in the book, Post-Traumatic Thriving, they want to jump ahead to the last chapters where we talk about all the fun stuff of thriving. And what they're doing, and they're making a mistake, and I warn them right up front, don't do that, because to get there authentically, you really kind of have to work through each stage in succession to get there. That's how you authentically, truly thrive. If you shortcut the issue or cheat and jump ahead, you're not going to have typically the same really solid, life-altering change that we're really going for.
And that's what I imagined, having had issues myself. You have to face up to it.
Yeah, you gotta work through it. It's tough, but we got to do it.
We're going to take our last break. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Dave Nassani, the Caregiver's Caregiver, has just released his 6th book entitled It's My Life Too, Thrive to Stay Alive as a Caregiver. It was specifically written for caregivers who know they should be putting their needs first, but just don't know how. Dave is the sole caregiver to his wife, Charlene, since 1996. He knows firsthand what caregivers are going through because he is one. He now speaks all across the country, offering caregivers his amazing caregiver support package. Even the airlines tell us that in the event of an emergency, to put your oxygen mask on first before you help your child with their mask. They know that those who don't heed their advice often black out, thus becoming unable to help either themselves or their child. And caregivers are exactly the same way. It's My Life Too, Thrive and Stay Alive as a Caregiver will help caregivers who are neglecting their sleep, diet, and social life and learn to put their needs first. Pick up your copy today or buy one for your special caregiver, on sale everywhere and at caregiverdave.com. And we're back with our guest, Dr. Randall Bell, and my co-host, Adrienne Gruberg. We're talking about trauma. And I wanted to ask you about surviving. A lot of people are just surviving caregiving. They're just surviving life. They're surviving their job. Is that a place, is that a good thing or is that not a good thing? I mean, in a way you could say, well, at least they're surviving. They're here, baby steps, one day at a time. There's a bumper sticker that says one day at a time. But I always think that surviving isn't good enough. Life is too short to just survive, to just tolerate life. What's your opinion on that?
Well, Dave, that's a wonderful question. I kind of take away the idea of good or bad, like, anger. Anger, the approach I take, which is related to your question, it's not good or bad. It's in fact, it's just a healthy reaction to a horrible situation. So I would say if somebody's angry, that's wonderful. That's a normal process. That's part of the healing process. Okay. So if you're angry, be angry. Just don't hurt yourself and don't hurt another person. But it's okay for a period of time to be angry. And even when you get to the thrival stage, in my book I use this word rinse and repeat over and over again, because you may be in the glorious, abundant life of thriving, but some days you might revisit anger. It might come back, and that's normal too. So I try and take away the good or bad labels we put on things and say this is normal and it's healthy. The thing is, Dave, we just don't want to get stuck there, because there is a thing called anger addiction, and like I say, we don't want to get stuck. So getting to your question about survival, that's part of the process. There's a part, you don't just jump from, trauma to, glorious thriving. There's a process, And survival is an important, essential part of that. So if people are feeling like right now I'm just kind of getting by, it is day to day, I say, hey, that's awesome. That's normal. But don't do that year after year after year. If you're doing that, we got to talk about some approaches to break out of that and kind of move forward. So it's kind of context and taking away the labels and not getting, beating ourselves up over a normal process, but, at a comfortable rate moving forward and progressing.
I've gotten to the end of my questions, but I'm wondering if there are things that you would like to talk about that you haven't had an opportunity yet. So this is your chance.
Well, I'd like to maybe introduce the audience to a couple of the people behind the statistics in the book. Her name is Jewell. You may know who Jerry is. Jerry starred on the TV show Facts of Life. Jerry was disabled with cerebral palsy as a child, and I happened to go to high school. Troy High School in Fullerton is where I went to high school with Jerry and her sister Gloria and, a lot of other wonderful people. And, Jerry was born with her trauma. And, and there was a lot of decisions made with the family. Do we just buy Jerry an easy chair and get her a nice TV and lots of, popcorn and potato chips, and that's how she'll live her life? And they took the position, no, Jerry's got capability, she has intelligence, and she's going to use whatever she's got. And that's what she did. And she started doing stand-up comedy, which I don't know about you, Dave. That's a tough gig,
I did 4 minutes, and it wasn't easy.
Yeah, but Jerry did that. She got the starring role on national TV. She's spoken at the White House 3 times, twice with President Reagan, once with Barack Obama. And she just filmed the Deadwood movie on HBO. I just had an Easter dinner with her, and my wife and I just saw her, I think, last weekend. She's just a wonderful person, and she's like the poster child. She probably doesn't like that term, for post-traumatic thriving. And so these principles we've been talking about really work. And I've seen them, from high school to today, how Jerry has used those principles. In fact, I interviewed her. The book is packed full of wisdom. It's not me. It's talking to people like Jerry and many others who have done remarkable things and getting the wisdom and then putting it into the book. And that makes this stuff all kind of come alive.
Trying to place her in the show, The Facts of Life. What character did she play?
She plays Cousin Jerry. She has, she has cerebral palsy, so she's disabled. Go Google her, you'll instantly remember. Well, the same story with Leo Fender. Leo Fender was born a young man in Fullerton. He had his eye taken out by a picket fence, and then later he was deaf because speaker cabinets blew up while he had his head in there. So he is deaf and half blind. He invented the electric guitar, changed the world of music. And today Fender is $1 billion company. But Leo Fender lived in a mobile home. He moved in our neighborhood when his family expanded a little bit. But, again, there are principles that people do, and we've talked about them. Leo Fender meditated in a very hot bath every morning. So that stuff really works. You got to tell your story. Leo told his story to his wife, who shared it with me, and we wrote a book about it. These principles really work to break out of just that dive or survival mode and really kind of wake up and tap into that energy. Because the thing is, Dave, trauma creates a lot of energy. And it can be bad energy, and it can be destructive energy, or it can be really exciting, positive energy. If we tap into it, we can do stuff like Leo Fender. We can do stuff like Jerry Jewell. These are regular people. I grew up with them. They were in my neighborhood. The stuff really works.
Yeah, and I think of Helen Keller. Many, many people. All you got to do is Google famous people who were born with disabilities, and they've just overcome them. Ray Charles. Beethoven was deaf. He wrote some of his best compositions when he was deaf. So yeah, it's like, okay, what's your excuse? Look at these people. So it's a great topic. It's a great show. It sounds like a great book. How can people get a hold of you and or the book and get it in their hands?
Well, I would invite people to just go to Amazon or go to your local bookstore and just say, I need a copy of Post-Traumatic Thriving. It's there. It's everywhere. We're going to do other editions with audio be patient with us. We're getting there. But get the Kindle version for 99 cents or whatever it is. And, I've had people, I love the conversation. I had people email me and say, you know what? My husband and I have read this book 3 times, and every time we read it, our trauma becomes less and less, because they were carrying some really big burdens that they shared with me. The stuff really works. Reach out to me at drbell.com. Easy to get a hold of. Email me. I love the conversation. Go to Amazon, get the book. And most importantly, let's teach our kids this stuff, because they're going to have traumas. And if they have these principles in their minds, they're just gonna go through life more successfully than if they have a trauma, and they will, and they get hammered and it takes them out. We don't want that to happen.
Yeah. Speaking of our kids, what's your opinion of the condition of our children today versus 10, 20, 30 years ago? What special things do they have to tolerate, and what advice can you give parents to try to help their children avoid the problems and the traumas that they're destined to face?
I'm pretty bullish. I'm pretty optimistic about our kids. I think our kids get a lot of adults who are complaining about the problems with the kids. I see the world differently. Of course, some kids have problems. That's to be expected. But as a whole, I have a lot of faith in the young generation. They're doing already with technology some amazing things, and they're more authentic. They're much more open about talking about things, and at least my kids and a lot of kids I see are not as materialistic. A lot of my generation were pigs, and I fell into that materialism, workaholism thing as a way of covering up my trauma. Now I don't care. I've had plenty of clients that are billionaires. I see how they live. I see the stress that it all causes. I'm not interested. So I overall think kids are doing a better job, and I think things are getting better despite the media cycles that are so pessimistic. I just don't buy it. I think kids are great, and I think they deserve a lot more credit than they're getting.
And how's this last year of COVID and lack of school going to affect their development?
Well, I think it's been a setback. I mean, no playgrounds, no playing tag, no running around with our friends, and the whole social thing. We're social creatures. We got to, COVID is horrible. I had it. It was a horrible experience. I'm not trying to diminish that. But on the other hand, I'm an economist too. There's costs and there's benefits. And we got to do a better job as society saying, COVID causes these costs, but the benefits of being together and socializing are really important. I think we're going to get through it. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and we will have learned a great lesson. I think as a society, I think we're now better at our virtual calling, but I think people are also anxious to get together in real life settings. And there will be a nice blend. I think the post-COVID world will, frankly, ultimately be better than what we had pre-COVID, ultimately.
Well, I'm grateful for your optimism, because it's hard to find that these days. So thank you again for coming on the show. We appreciate you visiting us, and thank you for everybody who's tuning in. We'll see you next week, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
I thank you.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing.